Good afternoon, everyone. In honor of Black History Month, thank you for joining us for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust 7th Annual Lonnie Ashley Moore Forum. It begins with us fostering racial understanding. The theme for this year's forum is building bridges by sharing our stories. Welcome to our virtual Zoom audience, and welcome to everyone joining with us in person today. My name is Lonnie Moore III, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Master of Ceremonies for today's program. I also serve as Vice President of Marketing for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, and I'm a 7th generation Direct Descendant of the Perkins Dennis family. I'm pleased to have with me today my lovely wife, Shantae. Hello, Shantae. And also my children, Lonnie Moore IV and Flirgetti Moore. Thank you for joining Dad. Today's forum is named after our late daughter, Lonnie Ashley Moore. An 8th generation direct descendant, Lonnie was a lovely young lady who attended our very first forum, which was held at Keystone College in 2018. A few weeks following, sadly, we lost her due to injuries she sustained from an automobile accident, which was just 6 days shy of her 21st birthday. Lonnie attended Delaware State University at the time as a criminal justice major. She enthusiastically worked as an intern for our chairwoman of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, Denise Dennis, learning the history and making herself available for whatever was asked. After her passing, we decided that we would dedicate future forums in her name to keep her memory alive and to encourage other young people to explore their family history. Lonnie, thank you for sharing your love for life with everyone you encountered. Your memory will be forever cherished. May you rest in peace. Now, if we have any college students or high school students that are here in attendance today, I'm not sure, but if you're a college student, you can wave to me. And if you are viewing virtually, see, we do have one, just came right in. But if you're viewing online and you fit that category, please share your information in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're coming from and where you're viewing from. We are so pleased to have all of you in attendance, and hopefully you will find today's panel discussion to be enlightening and enjoyable. Before we get started, though, let's make sure phones are silent or in vibrate mode. And now it is my privilege to introduce the Chief Operating Officer of the Museum of the American Revolution and our valued friend and partner for this important forum. She joined the organization in 2000 as the 2nd staff member working for the CEO. She has been actively involved in all facets of the museum's planning and development and was a critical member of the leadership team that opened the museum in 2017. Please welcome Zeanne Mason.
Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of all of us here at the Museum of the American Revolution. And what a joy it's been to partner with our friends at the Dennis Charitable Land Trust all these many years. You know, we've been doing this forum now here for 5 of the 7 years, and we're only 6 years old as a museum. So for us to do something for 5 years, that's a record. And it represents the importance that we feel about joining in this important conversation. I'm so happy to have you all here and online to talk about these important matters at this critical time as we remember Lonnie. You know, we've been open 6 years. In April, we'll celebrate our 7th anniversary, but Denise has been a part of this effort since long before that. It was in 2015 that she called me out of the blue to say that she'd heard about the museum and was eager to be a supporter, felt it was important. she invited me out to the farm. I went the next month. And so for the past 9 years, we've had this great opportunity to share the many synergies that the Dennis Farm and our museum have. We both believe that a inclusive telling of history is the authentic story of history. We both believe in the power of objects, and we've been privileged to borrow things from Denise's family, and certainly the power of place. And it's so exciting to see the work that's happening with the farm. So congratulations to all of those that are supporting that important effort. We here in the museum are committed to uncovering and sharing stories about the complex events and diverse people that forged America's ongoing experiment with liberty, equality, and self-government. Many of you, I'm sure, have been down to our galleries on the second floor. Feel free to go after the program today. We'd love to have you take the time to explore further. The Washington War Tent presentation, which is, according to the New York Times, the rock star of our collection, which is high praise for a tent. That program will show at 4 o'clock and 4:40 today, if you can stay. For those, I'm sure many of you have seen that presentation. Next Saturday, we will be unveiling a new exhibit called Witness to Revolution, The Unlikely Travels of Our Journey. I guess it's Journey. I always wanted it to be Travels, but I think, is it Travels, not Journey? Anyway, the same idea. Where the tent went, and from the revolution through the today. And as you experience the exhibit, you'll meet many of the people that lived, worked, were a part of it during the Rev War, after that, into the Civil War. Amazing story of an enslaved woman who saved the tent from likely destruction during the Civil War, Selena Gray, and then the people that conserved it and enabled it to be presented here at the museum. So come back if you can and see that show. It'll run for quite some time. We are very active on the web. There's a lot of resources that you can enjoy, including a virtual tour of a replica tent that we set up, and you can actually walk through. And we're active on social media. So hope you can enjoy those resources. But so again, so excited to be with you all today. Thank you so much for being here. Look forward to the panel. I know we're so happy to have Chelsea Frank from Rosemont, and my wonderful colleague, Adrian Whaley, and the ever fabulous Denise Dennis. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Zian. Bear with me as I have a couple of announcements to make. Inside your form folders, you will find a survey. We would appreciate it if you would complete the survey at the conclusion of the program and place it on your tables before you leave. If you're watching virtually, you will receive an email with this information at the conclusion. Secondly, each year we announce a video contest offered to any student who's attending today and in person, whether it's in person or virtually. So virtual audience, you are definitely able to participate. Students who do plan to participate, however, in the video contest will find the guidelines in their form folders. Please read them carefully. Those of you who have joined us virtually will find those guidelines by visiting our web address at thedennisfarm.org. We will announce the first, second, and third prize winners shortly after March deadline to submit. So I encourage you to pay close attention to what's being shared today. Take notes and be engaged. Now, generally what we do before we start each of these forums is in the spirit of fostering racial understanding, and this year, since our theme is building bridges by sharing our stories, we like to always take a few minutes to introduce ourselves. So I would ask that each of you to take a few moments to stand and maybe say hello, introduce yourself to somebody across the room that you don't know. And we'll take about 3 to 4 minutes to do that, introduce yourselves properly, and we will be right back. If we could start heading back to our seats, that would be appreciated. Virtual audience, hopefully you shared in the chat exactly where you are viewing from. If you haven't, please do so. Okay. Okay, we're going to continue this on. Thank you all for taking time to introduce yourselves. Excellent. Now, since some of you are not familiar with the Dennis Farm and what we do as the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, we have a short video to share with you that highlights some of the history of the farm, recent events that we have that we've held, and what the future holds. So sit back and relax, and welcome to the Dennis Farm.
think of land that I love, I think of America, land that I love, but I also think of a very specific place, the Dennis Farm. My name is Denise Dennis, and I am president of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. But more importantly, I'm a direct descendant of people who settled the Dennis Farm. My ancestors, free African Americans, came to Northeast Pennsylvania from New England in 1793, purchased land, and carved a farm out of the wilderness. And they did this at a time when only 10% of African Americans were free people.
As part of
This land has remained in the hands of an African American family from the time that George Washington was president of this country and has stayed in our family's hands ever since. My name is Darrell Gore. I am a 7th generation direct descendant of Prince Perkins. Prince was an African American Revolutionary War veteran. He used the money that he earned fighting in the Revolutionary War to purchase land.
Hello, my name is Lonnie Moore, and I'm a 7th generation direct descendant of Prince and Judith Perkins. In 2001, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust was founded by the CEO, Denise Dennis, and my great aunt Hope to protect and preserve the natural resources of the land. We want to turn this into an educational resource for students and scholars and others that are interested in this type of rare history. Couldn't really understand it as a youngster, but as I grew older and understood the history of the farm and how significant the role the family was to the community here at large, and really what it means to just everybody in general. I mean, there hasn't been much history that speaks about free African Americans dating back as far as 1793. It really shows about how the country was developed. And to now be standing on a piece of land that was my ancestors is just, it's awesome. I mean, at the top, we have a cemetery where our ancestors are even buried.
This is the cemetery on the Dennis Farm. All of our early ancestors are buried in this spot, but there are also others who are friends of the family who are buried in this cemetery. We're aware that there's at least 20 to 30, maybe even more interments in this property of African Americans. We believe a lot of these African Americans came during their journey from the South on the Underground Railroad. They ended up settling here, or they ended up dying here. But all of our ancestors, Prince Perkins, Henry Dennis, James Dennis, Angeline, Judith Perkins, are buried in this cemetery. This is kind of our most sacred site. For myself, Lonnie, and my sister Denise, this is where we know that we're with family. Without these people, I would not be.
my new friend, Denise, started to tell me the story of this farm. The American dream was realized through her ancestors' story and realized by free African Americans at a time when that was anything but common. To tell this story, to highlight the grit that Denise and her family's ancestors had against such great odds, there was no question that this was the place that the first semi-quincentennial bell must be placed. I'm honored to be able to stand here today and look behind us and see that grand, permanent semi-quincentennial bell, a bell that will in fact lock the Perkins-Dennis family story and highlight the contributions to this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania permanently into history.
Today, by honoring the Dennis Farm with this glorious bell, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the nation's keystone state, affirms that, in spite of the challenges confronting us today, we are still becoming a more perfect union.
Hope you enjoyed that. that video clip. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our chairwoman, CEO and co-founder of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. Her passion, she holds a passion, I should say, for realizing our family history and preserving it for all to share, which is, it's pretty remarkable. She has been a driving force of this trust, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, since she co-founded it in 2001. She's also my first cousin, who I've had the great fortune of knowing all of my life. And now it's my honor to introduce her to you at this time, Miss Denise Dennis.
Bigger than I am. The footstool is literally bigger than I am. Hello, everybody, and thank all of you who are joining us in person today, and those of you who are joining us online. I understand that we had larger online registration this year, which is understandable. This is the time of the year when viruses are afoot, and I myself am recovering from a cold, so bear with me. Since this year, I, for the first time, am a panelist. I'm going to make these opening remarks as brief as possible. And all of you who know me know that that is going to be very difficult because I always have something to say. But I want to thank Lonnie for his always gracious introduction. Zian, thank you for your kind words and for establishing for everyone our long relationship. It's so much fun working with you and the museum and Adrian and Michael. It's really great. It's a wonderful partnership. I want to acknowledge our partner, Fran, is that you? From Keystone College. We have an educational partnership with Keystone College, which is not far from the farm. They host our symposium every year. Docents from Keystone give tours of the farm. They hosted a reception and a luncheon when we received the bill last year. We have educational programs. Right now we have one on the farm with one of the students from your environmental studies project, and we plan to have an annual conference every year where we bring scholars in from all over the country on themes related to the farm. So they're our official educational partner. The museum is our cultural partner, and we also have a partnership with the Endless Mountains Heritage Region. So thank you, Fran, for being here, and thank you for all the Keystone has done. It's a great relationship. So, and you are pivotal, part of it. In fact, you're going to see my book. Fran is the one who said, get your books done and our college press will publish them. So when you've got a publisher, you got to get the job done. So, and that was really Fran, just really talking to me. So thank you, Fran, and I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for making the trip. All right, and again, I thank all of you who joined us. And now I'm going to move on so we can get to the discussion. Our theme this year for this year's forum on fostering racial understanding is building bridges by sharing our stories. It is our attempt in a very gracious way to confront head on the current, what I call the scourge of book banning and of school districts who are trying to remove African-American history from their curricula. We wanted to address this in some way, but Adrian, as you know, my mantra is proceed in the positive. So we're doing it from a positive perspective. And when I was out at Rosemont College recently, and I was talking to Chelsea, who's director of library services, Chelsea said, oh, I can definitely weigh in on that. And so we asked Chelsea to be panelist with me. So that's what we're going to be discussing. Not only how book banning and eliminating African-American studies impedes racial understanding and impedes our way from moving forward together as one nation of many different people working in concert, but also, as we always do every year at this forum, I always end by saying, I want everybody here and online to leave today as ambassadors for fostering racial understanding across racial, ethnic, cultural, and religious barriers so that we can move together as one. And in these years, this is the only way we're going to save our democracy. So all of you, listen and learn, because in addition to laying out the problems, we always seek solutions. With that, I'm going to actually stop talking. And we'll move on with the program. Thank you all.
Thank you, Denise. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today's panel discussion, Adrienne G. Whaley. She is an educator, a history lover, who currently serves as Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Museum of the American Revolution. Adrienne earned her bachelor's degree in African American Studies from Harvard University and her master's in education from the University of Pennsylvania. She has worked both in art and history museums, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the African Museum in Philadelphia, and the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. Adrienne loves the potential for objects, artifacts, and primary source documents to enrich student learning experiences. She carries a love of history for uncovering the stories of common people into her spare time as an avid genealogist, researching her own family history. And as a former programming chair and president of the Philadelphia's African American Genealogy Group, as both a museum educator and as a genealogist, she has presented on television and in workshops and conferences, both locally and nationally. So she's more than that. She's also another dear friend to the Dennis Farm, and we truly appreciate her. So please, at this time, welcome Adrienne.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. How are we feeling today? Yeah, our folks online are doing well, I hope, as well. We are so glad to have you here at the Museum of the American Revolution, and I'm excited for the program that we're all about to experience together. So as you all know, the theme for this year's forum is building bridges by sharing our stories. So this is an opportunity for us in a moment that can feel incredibly divisive. And like we are separated from our fellow Americans, fellow citizens, fellow members of the world community by great chasms. This is an opportunity for us to have a conversation that's productive, that thinks about opportunities, that thinks about solutions, and that gets some really interesting perspectives on the table. So I'm excited that, as you all heard, one of our guest speakers is going to be Denise Dennis, who is the founding president and CEO of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. And our other guest speaker is going to be Chelsea Frank, who is the executive director of library services at the Gertrude Kistler Memorial Library at Rosemont College. I will be moderating the conversation, but if you've met me, you know that I don't necessarily stay out of conversations that I'm moderating. So I might be sprinkling in some museum stories as we have our conversation together. And because this is a forum, this isn't just about the folks on stage sharing their perspectives. We're going to be inviting you into the conversation. That won't just happen in the Q&A that happens after our presentations, but I might actually ask the panelists a question and then turn to you all and ask if you all have thoughts, ideas, or perspectives on the topic. So stay tuned for that, whether you are in the audience here in person or whether you're joining us online. So just to give you the general outline of what's happening, each of our panelists is going to give about a 15 to 20 minute presentation, PowerPoint, so I have lots of wonderful images and things like that. And then afterwards, I will invite both of them back onto the stage so that we can have our conversation. I'll ask just a couple of questions to get things started. Then I'm going to open the floor to you all first in the room while our wonderful tech folks are going to be gathering some questions from the chat and the Q&A online. So if you've got questions, questions, please, if you're online, drop them into the chat so that we have access to those and we will bring them into the conversation. We'll chat for a while and then we invite you to stick around and have further conversation either online or in person. And hopefully everyone is going to leave here feeling inspired, feeling like you've been engaged, feeling like maybe the challenges and problems of the world are a little bit smaller, a little more surmountable than maybe they felt when you came into the room earlier today. So with that, I'm going to invite our first panelist to the stage. Denise Dennis, as you heard, is a 7th generation Pennsylvanian and the founding president and CEO of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. Under Denise's leadership, the farm has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places, received a Chairman's Award from the National Endowment for the Humanities, this is big, you all, has been recognized by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, was featured in the preview exhibition of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and as you saw in the film, was honored to receive America 250 PA's first semi-quincentennial bell in anticipation of the nation's 250th birthday in 2026. So Denise is just chilling, y'all. She's not very busy at all. She is also the author of 4 books because she needed more to do in her life, including Bristol Bud Sampson, Patriot of the American Revolution, Black History for Beginners, and A Century of Greatness, Outstanding African American Philadelphians of the 20th Century. Her articles have appeared in numerous publications, and she's been a guest speaker at various institutions, including ours, the Smithsonian, the Pennsylvania Historical Society, the Pennsylvania Farm Show, the 232nd Anniversary Commemorative Battle of Wyoming, plus a bunch of colleges and universities. And she's an alumna of Swarthmore College. So with all of that, I would like to invite Denise back up to the stage.
All of that work just lets you know how old I am. You know, if you live long enough, you get a lot done. But no, I've always been pretty driven. Let me begin. Hi again. I want to begin by saying, don't be afraid. Better days are coming. I chose this photo of the lawn on the Dennis farm as a frame for my presentation, The Persistence of Truth, because nature, like the perennial green lawn, is persistent. No one can ban nature, and no one can eradicate nature from being around us so we can study it. Today, unfortunately, we're living in a time when there are efforts afoot to ban books in libraries and school classrooms and to eradicate African American history from school curricula. But the truth is persistent and it withstands the test of time. So fear not, all will be well. Oh dear. Ta-da! From prehistoric times to the present, human beings have tried to record and communicate their experiences of life to one another. This is a photo of a prehistoric cave drawing in southern France, done by an unknown artist who is trying to communicate, as we today are still trying to communicate with one another. In ancient Egypt, human beings developed a pictorial form of writing known as hieroglyphics, in which they too communicated with each other, but also, by leaving these hieroglyphics, communicate with us across the centuries. The truth is persistent. It bears witness and it demands to be shared. Throughout time, there have been literary works that were so profound, they influenced or changed the course of history. Let's fast forward from the ancient world to the United States and look at some of these works. In January 1776, months before the Declaration of Independence was written down the street. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, a pamphlet that was published steps from here at 3rd and Chancellor Streets. Common Sense was the first well-reasoned, published argument in favor of independence from Great Britain, written in a style that appealed to the general public, to the common man. Within a month of its publication, 100,000 copies were sold, and there were only 2.5 million inhabitants of the 13 colonies at that time. People read it in their homes, in taverns, wherever they gathered. And during the war, 500,000 copies were sold. Common Sense was critical in encouraging and convincing American colonists that independence and democracy were possible and worth fighting for. As recently as 2006, Common Sense was the best-selling American title. By the way, Thomas Paine originally wanted to call Common Sense Plain Truth. The truth is persistent. I mentioned this last year, this work at the symposium. Before I talk about the appeal, I want to give you some statistics. According to Columbia University's Teachers College Research Center, school districts in 20 of our 50 states have measures to remove Black history from school curricula. The good news, though, is that according to the Research Center's poll, 85% of Americans, 30% Democrats, 26% Republicans, and 44% independents from various ethnic backgrounds agree and believe that Black history should be taught from K through 12. So we're hopeful. Given the current attack and assault on Black history, though, I feel compelled to point out why Black history is American history and should be taught. And I'm going to use 4 literary works, the first of which is David Walker's Appeal, one of the most influential. It was published in 1829 as an appeal to the colored people of the world, and most especially of the United States. David Walker was a free African American. He was born in North Carolina to a free mother, which is why he was free. He later moved here and was a member, I think, of the Bethel Church. And then he moved to Boston, where he published this in 1829. It was a 4-part series that affirmed that people of color, including the enslaved, were entitled to the same rights as everyone else. He felt that Black people, African Americans, had to be first convinced themselves of their equality, because there was so much in the society that said they weren't. And he gave it to sailors on ships that left Boston to make sure that it was disseminated throughout the South and read to enslaved people. He died in 1831, I think, not long after this was published. But in 1848, it was reissued, and it stirred free people and the abolitionists alike to redouble their efforts to end slavery. Everyone should read David Walker's Appeal. I mean, whenever I read it, I'm inspired. I can't go into the details because I have to move along here. The next, you all know, Uncle Tom's Cabin. You're all familiar with Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel that decries the horrors of slavery. This too had a direct impact on the abolitionist movement and the determination to end slavery. I've included it here today because in 1862, Harriet Beecher Stowe visited Abraham Lincoln at the White House, and it is reported that he said to her, talk about the power of words, the power of books, the power of literature. Abraham Lincoln said to her, so you're the little woman whose book started this great war. Here's to Little Women. The next is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Ann Jacobs, which was published in 1861. This is the true story of Jacobs, who, in order to escape an abusive slaveholder, hid in the crawl space of an attic that was 4 feet high for 8 years. Now, you have to read it. I don't have time to tell you how she ended up in the crawl space. This is actually Harriet Jacobs later in her life. You can imagine why she had to escape an abusive slaveholder. Having to bend in that crawl space affected her for the rest of her life. 8 years. She finally escaped. And because the woman who had been her slaveholder had taught her to read and write, she was later encouraged to write her memoir, which she did. And because she also dealt with the sexual abuse of women during slavery, given the morality of the Victorian age, she was ashamed. She didn't want to put her name on the book, so she wrote the book under the pseudonym Linda Brent. She was made to feel ashamed for what had been done to her. But it was one of the first accounts that told what happened to women under slavery. And as I say here, it awakened the conscience of America to the depravity, immorality, and abject cruelty of slavery. 10 years by Harriet. Whoops, I'm going the wrong direction. What's going on? I can't go backward. I want to go back. You're seeing my whole thing in backward form. Wait,
Which way you want to go?
all right, here we are. 12 Years a Slave. How many of you saw the movie? So you know this story. This is the story of Solomon Northup, a free Black man from Saratoga, New York, who was kidnapped and sold into slavery downriver, which was the worst, to Louisiana. And again, you have to read his whole story to know how after 12 years, he managed to retrieve his freedom. But it too had a powerful effect on the abolitionist movement, because in this case, he was able to write from the perspective of someone who had been free, then became enslaved, and then could see his keen observations of the slave system. It was like Du Bois' double consciousness. He was a free man who was able to see it from the perspective of a free man and of a slave man. And then after he wrote the book, he also produced a play, and he would star as himself in this play that described what had happened to him. His book, too, fired and flamed the fires of the abolitionist movement. So again, those works had a direct influence on history and should be read and should not be hidden. Now I'm going to talk about literature that corrects misconceptions and misinformation. This article was written by a brilliant woman named Denise Dennis. And it was published by the UNESCO Courier, the magazine of the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization in Paris. They asked me if I could write an article about medicinal practices that Africans brought with them from Africa to the New World. Because as you know, the whole smallpox inoculation came from a Black slave who was in Massachusetts. But I didn't want to write about medicine. I had learned when I was researching for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, I founded the trust, I visited historic homes in different places. And one of them that I visited was this historic home along the Mississippi outside New Orleans. It's called Laura Plantation. And when I was there, the curator explained to me that it was built using architectural techniques and building techniques that Africans brought with them to the New World from what is now Senegal. Last year, as some of you might remember, by last year I mean in 2023, the uninformed governor of Florida opined that slavery was in fact a good thing because it taught African people skills. Because in his sublime ignorance, he thought Africans came here as empty vessels. I wrote this article in 2004. And if you notice, there's a sidebar that says preserving building arts. That's because when I did more research, as I was preparing this article, I was told that it was African building techniques that were used in effect to build the entire French Quarter, and that they'd been passed down over the generations, but that in recent years, young people didn't want to learn them, so they're trying to preserve those building techniques. Whether it was the slave who told Cotton Mather about the inoculation for smallpox, or the architects in the area of Senegal who brought their skills. Oh, and this building technique is because Mississippi floods. And the water, the way they're built, when it floods every year, the water goes under the house. That is how they had to build in Africa. Excuse me, my voice is going. That is how they had to build in Africa from when the rivers would go under. And that is why that technique they use. And it's a very precise, detailed technique. You'd have to read the article. But Africans came to the New World not as empty-headed vessels, but with people with their own skills, their own languages, and their own abilities. And I'm going to be really snarky right now. Rather than remove Black history from Florida schools, the governor of Florida would be wise to learn Black history and emancipate himself from ignorance. You can't learn if you don't read, and you can't learn if your mind is closed. There was a time when it was believed that Black people didn't participate in the Underground Railroad, that it was largely a white enterprise that helped Black people. No, 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 no. This book is from our family collection. It belonged to our great-great-grandparents, Henry and Angeline Dennis on the Farm, and it is the first edition of William Still's Underground Railroad. William Still, as you know, is a Philadelphian, a free Black man who helped people escape on the Underground Railroad and kept meticulous notes. His handwritten notes are on Locust Street in the Pennsylvania Historical Society, and I was privileged to see them about 20 years ago. I went myself, his actual notes. He published this book, first time with the publisher, but he kept the copyright. And after the first edition, he owned all the copyrights after that. And our great-great-grandparents had a copy, and it is one that the Smithsonian selected from our collection to become a part of their permanent collection. But again, it changes the misconception that Black people were passive participants in the Underground Railroad. No, free Black people were actually very much involved. And we actually had Dr. Cheryl LaRoche at the Farm. She wrote a book called Free Blacks and the Underground Railroad, the geography of, what was it, rebellion or something? Of liberation. But anyway, this was from our family collection. And this was from our family collection and is now in the Smithsonian. This is the Black Phalanx. It was written by Joseph T. Wilson, who was in the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, and in 1888 published this book, which is a history of Negro soldiers in the American Revolution, or as he has in the wars between 1776 and 1783, 1812, and the Civil War. We never learned about all this in school. There was a time when they said the Civil War was a war that white men fought to free Black people. No, 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 no. Black people were participants. And these are the misconceptions. And you see what happens. when misconceptions exist, it's easier for bias to exist. It's easier for bigotry to exist. So we have to keep the truth out there and make an effort to show it. So again, in this too now is in the Smithsonian's permanent collection after having been a part of our family's permanent collection. This too was written by a brilliant woman. These are 3 different covers of a book I wrote, People, I hate to say it, it was originally published 40 years ago in 1984. And there are actually 4 covers. These are the last 3 covers. I was a prodigy. I was 2 years old when I actually wrote this book. Anyway, the reason I'm putting it up here is, you know, I researched it thoroughly and it is all true. But at the end, I finished the manuscript in December of '83. And by the time it went to press, I was kind of looking at what was going on during the Reagan administration. And I saw parallels between the end of Reconstruction and some of the things that were happening after Reagan was elected. And also because he had announced that he was running from Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers had been killed in 1964. He never mentioned them, but he did mention returning the rights to the states. And anyone who knows anything knows that states' rights is what ushered in Jim Crow at the end of Reconstruction. After the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, which ushered in the end of Reconstruction, which ushered in Jim Crow. So I did something a historian shouldn't do. You're supposed to wait till 20 years have passed before you comment on something. But at the end of my book, it's my book, I compared the election of Ronald Reagan with that of Rutherford B. Hayes, ushering in a change for Black people. And the truth is I was right, but that's another thing altogether. Well, I was interviewed for a position. I wrote the book. I was living in New York and I'd been an editor. I'd moved here. I taught writing at Temple for a year. And I was interviewed for a job in PR at the Graduate School of Fine Arts at Penn, now the Design School. And they wanted me because of my publishing background. But anyway, my direct report was to the dean. And he looked at what I'd said in the book and he said, "Aren't you afraid no one will hire you because of what you said in that book?" Everybody who knows me, you kind of know what my response would have been. I was brought up very well. In my quiet, ladylike, polite way, I said, well, this was my chance to tell the truth based on my research and information. So I just had to take a chance and tell the truth. And anyone who doesn't like it, I probably wouldn't be able to work with anyway. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is I got the job, and one of the departments of that graduate school was historic preservation. And what I learned there, I was later able to apply to the work we're doing at the farm. And as for the book, he had interviewed me months after the first edition. Since then, it has been continuously in print. And they changed the cover and they never tell me. But look at the most recent cover, is a raised fist. And I've met people who say, you just don't look like somebody who would have a book like that. But tell the truth. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. And the rest will take care of itself, because that book will live longer than I live, I'm sure. Also changing misconceptions. And I really have to move along. I know I'm past my time. One is an article I wrote for the Huffington Post. I wrote it in 2010 after the then governor of Virginia decided that America should declare April Confederate History Month. And that reminded me of a conversation I had when I was living in Paris with a fellow member of the American Church in Paris, a woman from Tennessee who heard that I was a writer, came up to me one day after church and said, "They tell me you're a writer. I want to be a writer." She's in her 40s. "Would you be willing to help me?" And I said, "Of course." I'd be willing to help you. She said, well, what have you written? And I said, well, I have a book published on Black history. To which she responded, oh, I should tell you, I'm a proud daughter of the Confederacy. Well, I was in front of a church. No, literally. And I was saying, please, God, don't let me say anything bad. And while I was thinking that, she said to me, and we do not believe the Civil War was fought over slavery. At which point she said, we believe it was fought over the economic independence of the South. And I said, oh God, please, you're testing me. I want to be a good girl. And I said to her, but the economic independence of the South depended on the free labor of Black people who were held and forced to work against their will. She honestly looked like she'd never heard this before. Now, I'm not kid you not. You have to read the article. And the article is kind of tame. I mean, I also, when she told me that her parents were racist because they believed Black people were inferior, I told her parents were psychologically disturbed. I did. Anyway, but I kind of calmed it down in the article. But I have it here because she believed that. Because after the Civil War, the Daughters of the Confederacy had a well-organized effort and plan that succeeded to change the narrative about the Civil War. Libraries, schools were not allowed to teach the truth. The myth of the Old South, of the grand old society that had been taken away, prevailed. In some places, the war was called the War of Northern Aggression. And this is what this woman, who was younger than I, had been taught and believed, because the narrative had been changed in the same way that there are groups today trying to change the narrative, to turn back the progress that has been made. Excuse me. I should never have taken on this topic because I could talk for years, but I won't. I'll keep going. I don't want to waste your time. I have long stopped looking at my notes, of course. The book next to it is by Hal Raines, who was an editor at the New York Times. Hal Raines is a man, he's white. His family was originally from Mississippi. But this book is about a regiment, not Mississippi, Alabama, of white soldiers from Alabama who fought for the Union Army in the Civil War. They were not slaveholders. They had no stake in slavery, and they believed in the Union. And I saw him on a program recently. He said their story was so hidden by the same forces that changed the narrative about the South that it took him years to dig up the information about this cavalry, this regiment. And he knew about it because his family had helped them, had helped these men. But again, if you hide history and you only tell half-truths, we can't move forward. So I had these two, American Shame. The title was Confederates Defending Slavery. And the reason I wrote for Huffington Post, by the way, is there used to be a time when you could respond to articles on Huffington, and I would respond to my little laptop. They contacted me 3 times and asked me if I would start writing for them based on my responses to things. So I wrote for them for a long time. Now, books that inspire empathy. The first, this is a book about an African-American who was in the American Revolution. He's buried in the Perkins Dennis Cemetery on our farm because he was married to our great-great-great-great-aunt, Phoebe Perkins Sampson. And this is a children's, it's for young people. It's illustrated, and it tells his story. And the reason it inspires empathy is it's one thing to hear that there were Black men in the Revolution. It's another thing when they become real with their own personal story, so that they're speaking to us as one human being to another. In order to get his pension for disabled veterans, he was blind later in his life. he had to make a 400-mile trip, round trip, by foot with his son to Connecticut to get the papers from his commanding officer. And this book was published last year by the Keystone College Press and the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, thanks to Fran, who kicked me in my petite derriere, said we would get the book done. And it is available, everybody, in the Museum of the American Revolution's bookstore. And as I tell everybody, Bristol Bud Sampson is now Museum of the American Revolution's bookstore, where he belongs. So if you want to go get a copy of the book, it really is a good book. Ta-da! Eric, you're up. I have another book coming out, also about a member of our family, another patriot of the American Revolution, Abel Benson. Abel Benson is the first cousin of our great-great-great-grandmother, Hannah Benson Dennis. They came from Massachusetts. And Abel was one of the relay riders. You know, listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Well, I want you to know that Abel Benson was one of the relay riders that night, April 19, 1775. And he let the citizens between Natick and Needham, Massachusetts, know that the King's Army was coming. The artist who's illustrated this book, Eric, do you want to stand up and wave, is with us. This is Eric Battle. And Eric, and little Abel played the trumpet. And that's why they asked him to blow his trumpet. He could manage a horse and he could blow a trumpet. And Abel's grandfather, Nero Benson, was our Darrell Money's and my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And he too played a trumpet in the Framingham, Massachusetts militia in the 1720s, okay? I'm finishing up. 2 more books that inspire empathy. The Diary of Anne Frank. I'm including The Diary of Anne Frank because it is one of the books that is currently being banned in some school districts. Just as there are people who want to deny slavery, who want to deny the horrors of slavery, there are people who want to deny the horrors of the Holocaust for some reason or other. But if you read The Diary of Anne Frank, and I read it as a young girl, again, she reaches you, one human being to another, one real life experience to another. And we learn through her, very much like Harriet Jacobs in Incidents in the Lives of the Slave Girl. Anne, as you know, and her family lived for 2.5 years in an attic in Amsterdam to avoid the Nazis. And her full humanity comes through that book. And when we feel the full humanity of people, whether it's Abel Benson or Bristol Bud Sampson or Anne Frank, we feel for them. And like music, their words get through to us the way music does, beyond reason, and our humanity is touched. And that helps us to get beyond whatever bigotry we might have. The last work is a work of fiction. If you'll notice, the typeface for both books were the same. This is a work of fiction by Toni Morrison, whom I was privileged to meet and know and interview. I love Toni Morrison. And when I interviewed her, so I was still living in New York, and she was at Random House, and I was in Macmillan. They were across the street from each other. And when I interviewed her for an article I was writing, I asked her why she wrote her first book. She said, all my life I'd read. I'd never read books about anybody like me. So I decided if I wanted to read them, I'd have to write them. And this story is devastating because it's not just about a little girl who believes she'll be loved if she has blue eyes. It's about anyone who's been marginalized, about any group that's been marginalized, because it shows what happens when a society does not recognize your humanity. It shows how it can destroy a soul. But just as Anne Frank continued to believe that at heart all people were good, the little girl in this fictional story still believes in people. She just believes that if I can just turn my eyes blue, like the little girl in the house that my mother cleans, if I have blue eyes, people will love me. she still believed that love was out there. But it is a devastating book that, again, cuts through our humanity because you feel for this child. When I first read it, I had to put it down for months in order to finish it because I was so heartbroken for this child who wasn't even real. So books, and both of these books are banned in school districts and in the United States. The Diary of Anne Frank and The Bluest Star. In fact, in some, all the works of Toni Morrison are banned. Finally, there's our bell. And these were my closing words the day of the bell singing. So let us proceed in the positive, as our ancestors did, moving in the light with the better angels of our nature guiding our way. Go out, be ambassadors, fight to keep literature and history available so that we can build a better world. Thank you.
All right, Denise, thank you so much for that. It's a really useful, I think, perspective on how we understand that books can change the narrative and how books can inspire and spark empathy when we learn about people who are different from us, who are having experiences that are unlike ours across space, across place, across time, across life experience. So thank you for that. Now, I would like to welcome another perspective on how we can build bridges by sharing our stories, this time from Chelsea Frank, who is, as you heard, the Executive Director of Library Services at the Gertrude Kistler Memorial Library within the vibrant Rosemont College community. Chelsea has a wealth of experience in both archives and libraries across diverse sectors, including higher education, museums, and nonprofit organizations. Chelsea has finally honed her skills in curating and managing knowledge resources. Before joining Rosemont, Chelsea served as the university archivist and electronic resources librarian at Cabrini University. Her experience has also left an indelible mark on prestigious institutions such as the NYSPCC in New York City and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So Chelsea, come on up.
All right. Hello, everybody. Again, I'm Chelsea Frank from Rosemont College. It's so hard to follow up from Denise. She's so passionate. And so I'm hoping, to kind of also bring that to you all. But really, I want to give the perspective from libraries and archives. Oh, I think I have to. Okay. So embracing diversity. Why is it important that we read these stories and that libraries hold these books, especially those that are being challenged currently? I always like to say that, books, you have your mirror books and your windows books. And this language was brought to us by Dr. Roden Sims Bishop, who is a professor out of the Ohio State University. And she talks about mirror books first. And mirror books are the books that reflect our experiences. They're the books that teach us that the experiences that we live and who we are is normal. It is, we deserve love for those and that we're not alone in our experiences. The window books they give us glimpses into the lives of people who may seem on the surface different. Their experience is not of our own, but they give us empathy. They teach us about one another. And what's so important to have both mirror and window books is that when you're combining those from the teachings of how to love yourself and the teachings of how to love other people, it brings us into a society that's more just, a better understanding. And last night, when I was actually going over this with a friend of mine, because public speaking makes me nervous. I'm not like Denise, who is so elegant, it's not something that comes natural to me. And so a friend of mine let me practice with her, and she actually had reminded me of Adichie's, who's a poet and a writer, of her 2009 TED Talk on the danger of the single story. And I listened to it on my way in, and so I had to add it in here because the idea of the window and the mirror is so great. But if you're stopping at just reading one story, that is your window, it's not enough. Reading the one story is actually quite dangerous. And she talks about that. And if you haven't listened to it, it was in 2009, she did it on a TED Talk, and it's really inspiring. She talks about the danger of the one story. And what she talks about is growing up in Nigeria and then coming to America. She grew up on stories written by Americans and Europeans, mostly white. And very similar to The Bluest Eyes, talked about how she wasn't reading stories of people that looked like her or had experiences of her. And she realized when she came to America that it was the same thing here. People weren't reading books on Africa. And if they were, it was maybe one story. It was the story of war. It was the story of AIDS. And it was the story of poverty. And those were not her lived experiences while living in Nigeria. And she encountered with her roommate who did not understand her. And out of the goodness, was good-hearted, but didn't understand, assumed she didn't know how to use a stove, didn't understand why her English was so good. And it was because of that singular story that we had of Africa. Now, she had experienced that as well, because while in America, she went to travel down to Mexico. And this was in 2009, which not very different than what we're experiencing today. Lots of discussions on the border and lots of discussions on immigration. And the singular story that had come out on immigration was that immigration was Mexican. And when she went to Mexico, and she describes it of having a moment of shock and then a moment of shame, because she had realized that she had bought into the singular story as well of Mexico, that when she went there, she was shocked to see people having tea and laughing, and we're not just running away from poverty and healthcare and all these things. And so when we're thinking of the importance of diverse books in our collections, in our classrooms, in our libraries, it's not just having one book on the African experience or the refugee experience or immigration or the Mexican or the American. It's many stories. Singular stories create stereotypes, and we need to constantly be reading and learning from one another. We need to constantly be having these dialogues that we're having right now. And when we talk about that, it's, and I had brought up this quote from Diaz, which I love so much, which is, if you want to make a human being into a monster, deny them at the cultural level any reflection of themselves. And I think that is so incredibly true. Stereotypes, again, come from that singular story, but a lot of the hate that we see, I think, just comes from fear, and it comes from not knowing one another. And so, yeah. And so what librarians and archivists as well do then is, we're not just putting these books on our shelves, we're doing outreach. A lot of, and I'll start from the archives perspective first, because I think that's a little bit less known maybe than some of our libraries. It's important that archives, as holders of our primary sources, are looking for the full truth, as Denise likes to call it. Because of the way historically our archives have been collected, there's large gaps in our history. There's many voices missing from the story. Collections were mostly brought on by wealthy white people in our country. They were the people that had the privilege of holding on to documents, of having family members that could write, and the money to purchase books and of those things and to keep them. They were also collected by those of wealth that could bring these collections together into one repository. Because of that, we're missing a lot of history. We're missing a lot of these pieces. And a lot of people like to, as we go and we discover these stories, such as the ancestors of the Dennis Farms, people like to say we're rewriting history. That's not true. We're just finding new information. We're constantly going out and getting new perspectives that were like before missing. And so archivists are always going out trying to collect in new ways instead of, maybe waiting for it to end up in the collections or working as custodians where the collection isn't building, it's living stagnant as what it is. We also, such as like at Rosemont College, Brittany Nix Crawford here is one of the co-directors of the Cultural Heritage Gallery. The Cultural Heritage Gallery, as many other colleges and universities, facilitate experimental learning through co-creation. This is learning and teaching with the student and the faculty. Because we learn from one another. I think that's the biggest thing, especially in higher ed, that we get is, as professors and librarians, we're teaching to the students just as much as the students are teaching us. And it very much involves creating exhibits, working with artifacts, discussions, and working together to learn in a different way other than that's just traditionally in the classrooms through lectures. And then, of course, as I had mentioned earlier, advocating for active archiving. This is going out and collecting oral histories. This is going out and seeking the information that's currently on campus for existence, grabbing flyers that are being brought around, recording such discussions as these, and not just waiting for these things to be brought to us, to make sure that there is no part of the institutional memory or history that is being left out. And then on the library side, these very much go together, but of course are kind of two separate things. On the library side, what we often try to do is create specialty reading collections. I apologize. So for instance, we have anti-racist reading collections. We have LGBT+Q reading collections. We have indigenous reading collections in our libraries. And these are curated collections that may have been previously dispersed, throughout the shelves and different collections, but we've brought them together in one place to kind of showcase the literature so that it's not that you're, going to get distracted by the Jane Austens and things that are so heavily taught already, so that it's right there at your grasp and more accessible. We also collaborate, of course, with community members, authors, organizations to come out and speak to our patrons in the library, and collaborating with faculty as well to make sure that texts in the classroom are diverse, and that teaching is promoting empathy and compassion and critical thinking. And so to kind of talk about librarianship, you need to also kind of talk about, how are we trained in order to do these things? And in order to get your master's in library and information sciences, you do need to be accredited by the American Library Association, ALA. And these ALA has created our Foundation for Modern Librarianship. And these are kind of the ethics that we go about, which is access. It's equity, intellectual freedom and privacy, public good, and sustainability. So with the essential set of core values which define and inform and guide us librarians, we do also have our Library Bill of Rights. And I know this is a lot of text, so I'm not going to stay on it too long. And you don't need to read it in its full. But as you can see, this is ALA's interpretation of the First Amendment. This is what we go off when we're building our collections and making sure that they're diverse, that all community members that we represent are being heard in our collections. And it's something that we go back and refer to time and time again. Now, when talking of these books, and I know Denise had talked on it a bit, is we are in an age of censorship and book banning. The Bluest Eyes, for instance, my favorite Toni Morrison book, which is Beloved, are all top contenders in being challenged. They're being challenged all over. And This isn't just in the southern states or in certain areas. As you can see, Pennsylvania is one of the top states for books being challenged and being threatened for being banned. These numbers every single year have been going up by 20%, which is very alarming. This is a height of book challenges that we have never seen before. And the censorship is not just books, it's also the internet, it's primary source access, it's really all over. And what it's doing is hindering our way of educating ourselves and the way that we empathize with one another. And these numbers are quite alarming. Over 4,000 total titles. The almost 2,000 of the unique titles is people coming as in groups to ban and challenge these resources. And so these are the 2022 13 most challenged books. We do The Bluest Eyes is almost on every single year. This April, during National Library Week, the 2023 results will be in. They do it every April, they announce it, and their methodology for gathering this information is from the libraries, it's from the state, so it's accurate. The most alarming thing when you see this selection of books is that out of the 13, only 3 of them are of white cis characters. All the rest are people of color or people of the LGBT+Q community. And that's extremely alarming as we're talking about why it's important to read diverse books and why it's important to not just have these mirror books, but these window books. Every book that we would recommend to have that window experience is being challenged. It's being taken off of the shelves. So how do you do that if you can't even get to the books to read them? And it's very alarming. We have Indigenous, we have people of color, we have queer, and it's quite sad. Now, how do libraries, as being those that curate and hold these collections, how do we protect ourselves? How do we receive these books that are being challenged and protect them? Well, it's not a fun answer, but it's mostly policies. Anyone that works in administrative knows that your policies are kind of your best way of protecting yourself from the community. However, they can really only go so far. A lot of the policies are more so meant to be transparent. And so like the first ones, for instance, talks about our collection development, the thought that goes behind our collection development, how we're choosing authors and books. And so that if somebody comes questioning a book of why it's in a certain section, you can at least give them something to take home with them. And hopefully that's enough to educate them. Of course, the Office of Intellectual Freedom has policies as well. They have best practices in terms of how to write these policies. And then, you have your branch systems, your school districts and things like that. However, you'll notice that the last one is legal support through ALA. And this is because as much as these policies are great at explaining the wonderful work that we do and why we do this good work and where this is all coming from in terms of an educational, they do not protect us from bills and laws that get passed at the higher level. They do not protect us if there is a group on the Board of Education or trustees that do not want certain material to be accessible to the community. And we don't really have anything to protect ourselves. ALA has legal action that will help. There's many librarians right now that are actually being harassed, that have to resign from their positions. Their families are being threatened. And they're trying to stand up for something, but it's very difficult. And when you don't feel as though you have the support, many school librarians and teachers in certain states are even in danger of being fined if they teach certain material in the library or in the classrooms. And even in some very extreme states can do jail time. And so it's very unfortunate that there really isn't much protecting the libraries and the archives and the teachers. And it's really just up to support from the community. And I know that's very negative, and I didn't want to leave it on something so negative. So I wanted to also just gather some things that all of you can do as well, to protect and support your local institutions, your archives, your public museums, your libraries, and things that you can do even in support of them, but in support of yourself. And it's very much a lot of what Denise has done in her life and her family members have done in their lifetime. And that's, empowering yourself, writing your own story, preserve your legacy. If you're not seeing your stories out in books or in the museums, and, then go out and write it, give an oral history, or write the book, and also take action. Pay attention, very importantly, of who's up in your local government, who's running for election in the local sector, because that's where you're going to see the most change that actually impacts you. Pay attention to who's on the school boards and who's on the board of trustees for these institutions, because those are the ones that are going to advocate for the people that are doing the work to get the resources and to protect the resources. And most importantly, cultivate understanding. Empathy and compassion in learning and teaching are the two greatest tools that you have. It's extremely important when having dialogue and conversation that we are making sure that they come out with a positive experience, and because we don't want them to leave a conversation and go, oh, well, they disrespected me, and I don't want to talk with somebody like that anymore because they're immediately going to be offended. We need to have respect for one another. It's the only way that we can continue to learn from one another and to grow from one another. Oh, I'm pressing buttons just left and right.
All right, so I would like to thank Chelsea for that presentation. I'm excited to ask questions of both of our panelists. So I'm going to invite Denise to head back up to the stage, and we're just going to get her settled in her chair, and then we will dive in. So especially for our folks online, just give us a moment to get ourselves settled, and then we'll be ready for some discussion and Q&A.
No.
All set? All right. Okay. Let's see. We'll test our mics. Good. Yeah.
Test.
Okay, well, we are ready to dive into some discussion. And I think maybe I should probably start by just saying outright that both Dennis Farm as well as the Museum of the American Revolution are nonpartisan institutions. So just to put that out in the open, and I think that's actually really important in relation to what Chelsea said, this idea that we have to approach people with compassion and empathy and understanding, because even when people are different from us, any opportunity that we have to build relationships, to build connections that will create change, don't come from insulting people who have different beliefs from us politically, socially, etc. But I also think that's important in relation to some of the research that's been put out into the world about how people of different political parties actually understand each other's true views. So there's an organization that's called More in Common US. And they put out a report in, I believe, 2019 that was meant to explore the different understandings that people in various political parties had of each other's beliefs. And what they discovered is that there's a pretty significant perception gap between what people in one political party believe that the other political party believes and what people in the other political party actually believe. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So Democrats, according to this research, imagine that only half, about 52% of Republicans think that properly controlled immigration can be good for America. So they think only 52% of Republicans think that. But actually, 85% of Republicans believe that properly controlled immigration can be good for America, right? So there's a perception gap of almost 32 percentage points. That's significant. Similarly, Democrats estimate that about half of Republicans, 51%, would admit that racism is still a problem in America, when in fact, about 79% of Republicans do. So again, this is almost 30 percentage points right there. On the other side, twice as many Democrats disagree with the statement that most police are bad people, 85%, right, than Republicans imagine. So 85 Democrats disagree with the statement, most police are bad people. Republicans think it's only 48% of Democrats. So do you see what's happening here? We imagine that people in the other political party are worse in terms of our understandings of what is right in the world than what they actually believe. So that might be just a bit of like useful, maybe level setting for the conversation that we can have together, is that sometimes our understandings of the other are vastly different from what the other actually believes. There's also a lot of research out there that talks about the fact that most of what we hear in the news is coming from the far extremes, and that there's actually a group in the middle, the exhausted middle, some researchers call it. What is the work that we can do with the exhausted middle, or the silent majority, some people call it, so that maybe they're a little less exhausted and a little less silent, right? So that we maybe have opportunities to show how much more closely we can come together. So let's think about that as we're having our conversation with one another. And with that, I think I want to jump in maybe to like a pretty significant question, because I want to talk about fear. When we think about the reasons that folks might have for not wanting certain stories to show up in school libraries and public libraries and school classrooms and things like that, if we take a step back to think with an empathetic and compassionate response, oftentimes what we see is fear. Fear that the world is changing, fear that power might be shifting, fear that their children or their grandchildren or members of their community might hear something that might make them feel bad about themselves, right? When you all think about the challenges that we're seeing around book banning, around books being recommended for maybe older students than we think should actually start having access to these things, we're asking people to engage with and accept discomfort. How are you all practicing that in your own lives? And what do you think are the most useful ways of encouraging other folks to embrace discomfort in their learning? Who wants to go first?
Well, obviously, you have a forum, you recommend books to people, you talk a lot, you write a lot. I mean, I'm actively doing it. So, and you can't be afraid of the truth. I mean, when we were having Chelsea and I were having our conversation, and I mentioned that a lot of the parents who want Black history taken out, they think that white parents feel that talking about slavery makes their kids feel guilty. And you pointed out to me, Adrian, that there are some Black students who don't want to learn about slavery. And I said, well, that has to do with how it's taught and who's teaching it. But it doesn't mean you throw the truth out, because the reason I called my talk The Persistence of Truth is if we run away from the truth, we can't move forward. To not discuss history, truly what has happened, we can't understand the present. And that is particularly true, since this is a forum on racial understanding, when it comes to race. There I had a friend here in Philadelphia. All four of her grandparents came from Ireland at the turn of the last century. We were really good friends. And she said she didn't understand affirmative action because her family hadn't been slaveholders and they had nothing to do with all of this. But we were really good friends. And we sat in her living room one night. We lived in the same apartment building. And I explained things to her. And I told her how, in effect, her family had been beneficiaries of the racism against Black people, who after 1 or 2 generations because they had different color skin, could not just blend into mainstream. We had a really good conversation. And you know what she said to me? You know, I never understood all that before. And it changed how she perceived. She could see the need for affirmative action. But if you're afraid, and then the idea that, you know, Black students are afraid to hear about history. No, you've got to toughen up. I mean, really, I didn't learn a lot of this in school. I was very, very blessed to have great family, both Norman Dennis and Harriet Dennis, who read everything. I learned about it at home, so that by the time I was learning about it at school, I didn't feel ashamed. I just felt that the people who had been slaveholders were really bad people. And I'm a writer, so I talk in stories. But I'm going to tell you one story. When I was in 6th grade, during the Civil Rights Movement, there were not a lot of Black people where we grew up. And one man in Kingston, Pennsylvania, to spite his neighbors, he was angry with them, and he put a sign in front of his house that said, "For sale, colored people only, Kingston, PA." My dad, and as some of you know, I was adopted by my grandparents, so he was 2 generations beyond me. He wrote a letter to the local paper because they put this picture in the paper that this man was selling his house only to colored people despite his neighbors. My dad wrote an article for the paper describing how long our family had been in that area, going way back to the 1700s. Daddy wrote the most wonderful letter, and they printed it in the local paper. I forgot about this, but years later, one of my friends from elementary school, Rita Boyle, Irish Catholic, she said, "Remember that time your dad wrote that letter for the Times Leader?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about it." I said, "Why do you remember it?" She said, "Don't you remember?" She said her father had read it to their family at the dinner table that night. And her father thought my father was so courageous to have done something like that. And she said, "You know, the next day, I wanted to talk to you about it at school." She said, "I thought, oh, I really wanted to talk to Denise about it." She said, "But I was afraid." She said, "Because we never talked about you being a different color." She said, "And I was afraid that you would be embarrassed and uncomfortable that I brought it up." And she said, "Do you remember?" And then she said, I remembered. I remember the color of the tiles in the girls' basement when she came up to me. And she said, instead of being embarrassed or uncomfortable, she said, "You were so excited. You were so happy I brought it up. And you were able to talk about it too. You were able to talk about everything your father had written about. It is how we convey the information."
So let me ask you a follow-up question, and then I'm going to come to you, Chelsea, with the same question. I would imagine that most of the people who are joining us in the audience, both on site and online, are people who already see the value in building bridges by sharing our stories. And it can be relatively easy for folks who already believe that that's important to say that other people should just get over the fear. How do we create the circumstances that allow people to have trust, to have the kinds of conversation that you had with your friend about affirmative action? How do we engender a space so that young people in school don't feel uncomfortable, or because discomfort is okay when learning? How do we create an environment where people are ready, willing, and able to learn through discomfort?
To move beyond it. Again, it's how it's taught. It has to, I mean, this is going to sound so hokey, but it has to be taught with love. We have to, you have to teach it in a way that you are valuing the other person's humanity when you tell them, and that you are very sensitive, just as Rita was. She was afraid to approach me. She didn't know what my feelings would be, but she risked it. And of course, as she did, it didn't upset me because the people who taught it to me had taught me the background in a very positive way. And that's what it is. So when I taught writing at Temple, I taught my Black history book because it came out while I was teaching there. And even though I taught a writing course, I thought, oh, we're going to use my book and all of the students are going to have to write an essay about it. And some of my students, remember there was a kid from South Philly, he was white, worked in South Philly, worked in a grocery store. He said, a lot of people got on him. Why are you reading this book? Why are you reading this Black history book? And he was able to say, well, it was assigned to me. But I had to work him through his discomfort level. Now, not everybody has people who can do that, but each of us, and that's the point here, you're asking what each of us can do. We have to be sensitive to the people we're talking to and how we convey it to them and not attack. And it's hard. I mean, I think it takes my Black history book. Nobody feels uncomfortable. It's sad, but I wrote it cause and effect because I didn't want it to be a book that is blaming white people. Now, you're not going to be able to tell in the book, which is illustrated, but that was a decision on my part. And the way I laid it out, I was very careful to just make it seem this happened, then this happened, and there was that consequence, except for my little part about Reagan and Rutherford B. Hayes at the end. But I was very careful to do that because you cannot reach people if you're pushing them away. But at the same time, you can't be so obsequious in order to bring them in that you don't have an effect. So it's a constant balancing act. I do it all the time. The farm is in a largely white county, Republican county in Pennsylvania. So here you have this African-American historical site in a largely Republican part of Pennsylvania. So I'm always having to balance. I think I grew up balancing, having to do that. So you have to be aware of your surroundings, aware of the people to whom you are talking, and aware of how you present. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that absolutely helps. And I should say, we should remember that perception gap. So, and you've said this to me, that even that being in a Republican county did not necessarily mean that people treated your family badly for being people of African descent.
Yeah, they were Lincoln Republicans back then. Oh, yeah. And even now, to add to that, people up there from the local historical society to our neighbors, they're very proud of this history. And they've been very supportive when we need letters of recommendation for grants and things. They're very supportive of this history, which is another way of saying not every Republican is, racist. And there is that perception out there today because of a fraction that has taken hold of the Republican Party. So, I always say the reason it's easy to have biases and prejudices and hatreds, it takes a lot of energy to be open.
Absolutely.
To be open, you have to take everybody as you find them.
Yeah.
And that's harder. It's easier to just say, they're all that way and they're all that way. Then you're done. But it takes a lot of energy and human empathy, that word I love, to really be able to relate to people.
You all are going to hear us use the word empathy a lot, so just prepare yourselves for that. But I hear you saying that you need to teach with love. I hear you saying that patience is important, that being open, thinking about your audience is really important. Removing emotion from the conversation sometimes is really important. Chelsea, when you think about all of this, when you think about the fact that people are sometimes just approaching things with fear and not necessarily hatred, how do you imagine approaching these conversations and meeting people where they are?
I really just have to second everything that Denise said, because it's the same answer essentially. Is it's putting the work in to be compassionate, to be patient with one another, which is a huge one. Mother Cabrini, who is a saint that I really look up to, she has what we call an education of the heart. And it's teaching from the heart, it's teaching from the soul, and it's reminding people that education is not just from the head, it is from the soul and the body. And that's the spaces that I was taught in that allowed me to learn and to grow as a person. I am obviously white and grew up in an area that was predominantly white as well, and wasn't a very diverse area. It wasn't till I was in college that I met people of diverse backgrounds, religion and color and sexuality. And it opened my eyes because there was a lot of stereotypes that I had been around, not necessarily taught, but that just existed and that I had been taught in some way. And realizing from being in these classrooms with my classmates who were of color or different genders and sexuality, and allowing me to make mistakes, allowing me to, and not scrutinizing me for that, not judging me for that. And instead of saying, Chelsea, where did you learn that? Or why are you saying that instead of this? And then telling me why that was incorrect and allowing me that. And even vice versa, as I had amazing professors in my time in college as well that would make mistakes too, and they would own it and they would take responsibility and they would correct it. Because the truth of the matter is that we are not born inherently knowing everything, and we're learning every single day. And that is true for the professors and the faculty teaching as well. I always say I learn the most from my students. And it's why I decided to switch into higher ed after being in the nonprofit and museum sector, because it's the students that I learned the most from and that I value so much of my time with. And so again, I think it's compassion, which is hard. It's hard when we have loved ones that we feel are being attacked or that we are ourselves being attacked. But nothing gets done without hard work. And so it's a mix of all of these things.
And it can also, I think, feel challenging when we want to see change happen immediately. We want to see change happen yesterday, right? Or 100 years ago. And so it can be really challenging to say that we need to approach this with patience and with love and with empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the reason I had titled my presentation A Dream Deferred is because it's based off of the very famous poet by Langston Hughes, A Dream Deferred. And this was written, of course, during the Harlem Renaissance many years ago, and very much talks about the African-American experience of finally being in this environment of art and music, but it not being respected or highly regarded. And it's frustrating when we're now having this conversation in 2024 and we're still having it. It's the essence of what the poem is. However, we have made strides. We've made huge differences. Denise and her family are a huge example of that. And it's why the work is so important and why we must keep striving and keep working, even as frustrating as it may seem sometimes.
I don't want anyone to be confused when I say patience and leading with love. I'm fiery, and
Are you fiery?
and I don't mean by patience like, oh well, they used to talk gradualism that William Faulkner said about Black people. They just need to be a little more patient. This is in 19. I'm not particularly patient when it comes to racism, but I know you kind of see where people are and you kind of know how you have to bring them along. I mean, it's like the woman who said she was a proud daughter of the Confederacy. She clearly thought, I will confess to this Black woman I'm asking to help me become a writer. I will tell her I'm a daughter of the Confederacy and she'll forgive me and then she'll help me. And I was like, I didn't say I'm not going to forgive you. I just said, no, you're wrong. And then as she tried to clarify it by saying, well, my parents are racist and I'm probably a racist too. She said nothing has really changed in the South. And I'm thinking, this woman's crazy. She's saying this to me. But she still thought, I think because I was a Black woman, that she could talk to me like that and was going to be all right, that I would forgive her and help her to be a writer. But I came back, but my patience also had a stinger in it. And when she said that her parents were racist and they thought Black people were inferior, I said, well, then your parents and their friends are psychologically disturbed because they believe something to be true that is demonstrably not true. I didn't have all that in the article. That's my way of being patient.
People might
Truth.
challenge whether the word
You-
patient is the word there.
Right,
But
What I say is truth.
Mhm.
Because, and then I said to her, it's nice that you're proud of your Confederate background. I'm very proud of my background. I come from a family of Black people that were free in the North and were landowners dating back to 1793. She looked like I'd slapped her. Her head went back. And she said to me, I've never heard of such a thing. And I said, yes, I can imagine. There are lots of things you've never heard of. I was being loving. I was being patient. I was being kind. That does not mean I wasn't putting the truth. Truth is powerful.
And it sounds like you were being direct and straightforward. So let me ask you this question. When folks are put in a position where the stories that we have to share are being disregarded, how can we find the courage or the energy or the disposition to be willing and able to stand up for ourselves and to tell people that those stories matter? Where did that come from for you?
I think you just have to wrestle with yourself and you have to know who you are. Remember I said in our conversation, you have to own yourself. You have to own who you are. I mean, I don't know how to be any other way. But you sort of have to wrestle with yourself. And of course, that's the hardest journey for anyone in any realm of life, introspection and wrestling with ourselves. That's the toughest thing of all. Once you've confronted yourself, you can kind of handle anything else. That's when you have to, and again, you can't be so afraid of rejection and not achieving your goal that you back down. Publishing. I've written things where editors in New York have wanted me to write a more stereotypical kind of character. One editor told my agent, this does not seem like it was written by a Black woman. One of my
They had a
books.
single story.
Yeah. I've had rejection, and they have wanted me, even about the farm, to invent things that never happened. Some what I call horror story. And rather than compromise, I am not a best-selling author. That's my choice. Now, some people want to be accepted. They want whatever treasures come from that they don't make that choice. And that keeps them from owning their own truth because they want access. So each one has to decide for him or herself just how much of yourself you're willing to give away in order to achieve something that the larger society has told you you should have. How much you want to be accepted, how much do you want to be liked? But as I always saw it, I remember thinking this at one time when I was still living in New York.
And then I'm going to turn to Chelsea.
Right. If you give too much of yourself away to try to be what other people think you should be, sooner or later, there's nothing left of you.
So I want you all to start thinking about your questions, both in the audience as well as online. But I want to actually turn this question over to Chelsea because you all are in two very different environments, right? You all are operating a family farm that has been in your year for years or in your family for years and years and years. You have been working at colleges and universities and public institutions and things like that, where your ability to speak up and speak out has different kinds of constraints on it. So how do you, when you're in a moment where you have a story that seems important to share, how do you make the decision about whether or not you're going to do that as a process of helping us all build bridges?
Well, as my father likes to say, I have the gift of gab. So many times I just do it, whether I should or shouldn't.
Consequences be darned.
Yes. that's why I love higher ed so much. I don't feel like my voice is ever stifled there. I have had jobs where that's not the case, and you have to make a professional decision because you're representing not just yourself but the institution, and it's difficult sometimes. Now, I left those institutions because of that, though, because that's just not who I am. Now, that's a luxury that I have, though, and I'll just be frank, a privilege that I have, that I could choose to leave those jobs and pursue something else. Not everybody has that. And so if that's something that you're facing and you don't have the luxury of leaving your job and going somewhere else, I would find people there that you can trust and talk to them about it, and work out ways that you can then share that story where the essence is still there and the truth is still there. But maybe you won't be in danger from a power of being fired or in trouble of some sorts. Making friends at your job is so important. I had recently shared with my 2 work friends who are here, just a post that I had seen about that, because it is scary when there's powers over you that you don't have control of. But if you can find a family at work that you can confide in and learn in and talk with, then do that, because it's going to be life-saving, and they're going to be the ones that help guide you in being able to get your truth out and show a piece of yourself and what you have to offer.
Thank you. I'm wondering if any folks in our audience have any questions. Let's start maybe within the room. Yes. And let's see, we've got a microphone coming over to you so our folks online can hear.
I am an educator, and I love the message about teaching with compassion and having empathy. But at the same time, I find myself in a United States where millions of people flock under the banner of a demagogue who considers empathy to be a sign of weakness, compassion to be despicable or just weak, and who embraces pathological lying as a way of life. So I'm trying to counter despair in a certain political time with positive messages from here. So this is really, I don't know what this question is. It's just kind of spilling out of me.
Yeah. No, I think that so many people in education and lots of other areas of life right now are, in particular, because of the media, the noise that we hear a lot, particularly from, again, those loud edges, the wings, it's hard to see that there are many, many, many people in the middle who have a greater sense of compassion and empathy and conscience and caring for their fellow human beings. That's what we try to hold on to here at the museum. We see every day that we cannot judge any of the books by their covers, right? The people who come into our museum may look one way and have beliefs that are completely opposite to what they might look like. So we always have to remember that we have to keep our doors open, right? So that we can be guides on the side and learn with other people, as opposed to just assuming and beating them over the heads with like the hammer of truth, whatever we think that truth might be. People tend to be open and excited, and we tell lots of diverse and sometimes challenging stories in our galleries, and almost without exception, people are excited to hear those. Even recognizing that oftentimes the story of the American Revolution can seem like it might only attract one kind of person, but it turns out everyone comes here and learns something and is excited by that. So that's something that keeps me going, but I wonder what keeps you 2 going.
Chelsea, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. That's difficult. And it's, we face it every day as well, in higher ed, even from the librarian side. And it's frustrating, and you can get burnt out, and you can, but you have to, I think, really dig within and continue, because even if there's 20 people in that classroom that aren't getting it, there's probably 1 or 2 that are. And if you can have someone walk away with that, I think that's really important. And even if they don't get it right then, maybe down the line they will. And I think that's so important. And it's tough though. It is. And I will say as well that with this misinformation and with there being people in power that are spreading misinformation, the best thing that you can do is teach literacy and teach it's something that librarians and archivists do every day, is do information literacy sessions. And I'm a huge advocate for these services that librarians and archivists do, because we live in an age with so much information and it's just in your face 24/7, and it can be difficult to navigate it. And teaching people, not just students, how to navigate it, how to take a piece of information that's in your face and see if this is actually authoritative. Is this a primary source? Is it a secondary source? Or is it just opinion based off of nothing? Truth is exactly what you want. Having authoritative files from the archive, or bringing literature where you can say, these are their methodologies. This is where this study is coming from. This is not opinion. This is fact. And I think that's the best way that we can do to sort of remedy some of what our country's going through right now.
In the field of history, we call that historical thinking skills or historical thinking strategies. And that's often taught in classrooms in elementary and middle and high school. So I have hope that people are learning this, but it's almost like people need to relearn it again and again and again, including as adults, right? One other thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to you, Denise, is that there have been studies time and time again that show that when you are trying to disabuse someone of a myth, if you repeat the myth, you are cementing the myth.
Yes.
So if you were trying to change someone's understanding of a thing, do not say, here is the myth, and then here is the fact.
Exactly.
Just say, here are the facts.
Yes.
Skip the myth entirely. The more people hear it, the more they believe it to be true. It's about repetition, and that's what cements it in your head. So that's just a useful tool or technique for us all to be thinking about.
First of all, I want to thank you for the question, because I think you articulated what a lot of us are thinking right now. And because, as Adrian pointed out, both the Museum of the American Revolution and the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust are not political organizations or partisan organizations, I'm going to have to, in effect, edit what I say and be less outspoken than I would. But we're all very frustrated about the amount of disinformation that is out there that is dividing us as a people. Because, of course, when you can divide, the cliche is true, divide and conquer. And if you can divide people and make people not trust one another and not trust the government and not trust the laws and not trust the institutions that enable us to function, it opens the door for dictators, authoritarianism, and all sorts of things that we in the United States don't think can happen here, even as we're watching them kind of get a grip on the national imagination. And again, because we're not partisan, I'm not going to quote statistics I've read recently. When I talk about truth, Adrian, it's what you said. You can't bombard people or hit them over the head with information when they come in here. But by simply presenting the truth in the way that the museum does, that's what I mean by truth. Call it facts. And even that today is getting to be crazy. As Kellyanne Conway said, everybody has their own set of facts these days. But by presenting the truth, and as you said, not repeating the misinformation, proceeding in the positive, presenting the truth repeatedly, it does sink in. I am a true believer that even if you don't get someone the first time, something you say might take seed in their mind. And later, when they're reflecting at a time when that information is needed by them, it will click what you said. But again, you just have to make sure you're putting the truth out there. And also, I think in schools, and I don't know how we're going to do it, we're not teaching history enough, and we're not teaching how it's connected to the present enough, and we do not teach critical thinking. When I taught, and even in a writing course at Temple, we would read things and the students had to write based on the readings. And when I told them, I'm not interested in hearing what I've told you, I know what I think. I want to know what you think about what you've read. They would look at me like, what? You want to know what I thought? I said, I already know what I thought. I want to know what you got from evaluating this information. And then you write it in a form where I can understand it. Because I don't need you to tell me. Because they were used to, and the reason I told them that is there are a lot of professors who give you an A if you tell them what they've lectured on. They're not interested in what the students had to say. But I was interested in how the students thought because I wanted them to learn to think. And we are not teaching young people how to think. We're teaching them to regurgitate information. And if they don't learn to think, they're not going to be able to evaluate newspaper articles. They're not going to be able to evaluate what they're hearing on the news, the noise. Freudian slip, big time. But anyway, that's the other thing. How we prepare people for thinking critically so that they can better evaluate information. And along with that goes with the idea that my students were also surprised that their opinions mattered to me, that I respected their perspective. And I'm going to brag about myself.
Quickly, because we're going to do one last question from the audience.
I was asked back. I took the job at Penn, but they received so many compliments about my teaching that they asked me to come back and teach a class the next year to teach other instructors my teaching skills because they'd gotten so many, and it all stems from the fact that I respected my students and I wanted to know what they thought too.
And I want to shout out to all of the teachers who are out there who are doing this work, right? The teachers who want to teach their young people how to think and not just regurgitate facts. We interact with so many of them at the museum and they lift us up every day. So I just want to say kudos to you and the other folks who are doing that work. We have just a couple of minutes left and I want to know if there are any additional questions from the audience. I'm sorry. So I don't know if we have any more online questions yet. I've got my colleague. No. Okay. So let's see. We've got a question in the front of the audience.
Hi, sorry. I'm Saviola. I'm a senior at Rosemont College. And a question that I have is, how can cultivating empathy and compassion in learning and teaching contribute to fostering inclusive and equitable communities, whether it's in a workplace or, whatever we conceive as a community ourselves?
Yeah, who would like to take that? Maybe in about a minute.
I'll quickly start so that you can as well. I mean, as educators in higher ed, the number one thing that we're thinking is what we're teaching you and how you're going to take that to your communities when you leave. So what we're teaching every single day and what we're hoping that through these experiences that you're having, these lessons on empathy and the lessons that you're taking in every day in the classroom, that when you leave, such as Rosemont, which shout out, you're then going to your communities when you're off campus and you are taking the exact same things that you were taught and the lessons that you have taken on and taking that elsewhere, and spreading that information and just cultivating, because once then somebody in that community is doing the same, and then you have the ripple effect where it's then spreading and spreading and spreading. And then hopefully where we get to a more just society as a whole.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Well, always compassion, empathy, love, that draws people in. And so they feel that they're in a safe space. And if people don't feel that they're in a safe space, they can't hear what's being said. So before you can even attempt to persuade or share the truth, people have to feel that they're in a safe space so they're not being attacked or criticized or blamed for something it was like the friend of mine who said, my ancestors, they came in 1900, they had nothing to do with slavery. And I didn't get angry with her. We were good friends. And I just said, well, let me just explain. So that's what approaching someone with compassion does. It creates a safe space so the information can get through. And the other thing is to remember, and it's hard, we're all coming from different backgrounds. And particularly when it comes to race in this country, people have biases they don't know they have because they've been reinforced generation after generation after generation. And for those of us of color, it's a lot to deal with. Knowing that there are a lot of people
who just basically have these weird ideas about us. I mean, we know we're normal, but you just know there's a whole society, and they've had a lot of reinforcement telling them, like girl from the South who felt comfortable telling me her parents were racist, the Confederate girl, because in her world, that was cool. She didn't even see that that was like way off. So we have to do a lot of understanding. And along that, as a person of color, I've always felt privileged that way because this is my only bias. I always felt that I knew more than everybody else because I knew how imperfect our society was. I mean, I was the only Black girl in my elementary school. One of, as I like to say, there were 300 Black students in my high school graduating class. 300 students, only 6 of us were Black, and 2 of them were cousins of mine. So I always felt by being an African American, I understood things about America that some of my white friends didn't understand. Although, if they're listening online, I know one is listening from California, they heard a lot about it because I talked a lot about it when I was in high school. So in a way, maybe that's something, to not look at it something as a detriment or an impediment, but to take the very position of being in a minority position as a position of privilege. The Philadelphia attorney, Sadie Alexander, she was married to Raymond Vase Alexander. She has a quote, and I have it in my book, A Center of Greatness. She said, I always thought it was very interesting to be a little colored girl. Well, I kind of sort of feel the same way. If you can take your experience, value your own experience, and then approach others in a sharing, compassionate way, we can get through some of this. And we have to, because right now, what has happened to people in minority positions,
I'm giving you a 15-second.
It's happening to all of us right now in this country. And we could lose this democracy, literally, if we don't wake up and start looking at what's going around and thinking critically.
Thank you, Denise. That might be the point that we end this conversation on. I want to thank both of our panelists for a really interesting conversation. I think that you all probably have more questions you want to ask them. So, stick around and chat with them. Our friends online, if you have further questions you want to ask, send an email to education@amrevmuseum.org, and I'm happy to send things the way of our panelists. One more round of applause for Chelsea Frank and Denise Dennis. And I'm going to hand it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, possibly Lonnie Moore, or am I handing it over to Daryl?
All right, another round of applause for our panelists and moderator. Thank you very much. One of the great things I enjoy best when working for the trust is being able to spend meaningful time alongside family. For something that we're all so passionate about, preserving the history of the Dennis Farm and sharing it with people such as yourselves. Daryl Gore, Vice President of Development, is as dedicated to the history and preservation as anyone. Most notably, Daryl served as project manager for the America 250 PA placement of our semi-quincentennial bell we were honored to receive this past summer in recognition of this country's 250th anniversary celebration, which will take place in 2026. And he's currently working with an architecture firm who is transforming our 200-plus-year-old farmhouse into an interactive museum. He too is my first cousin. He's a man of many hats. So at this time, please welcome Daryl.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Denise, Adrienne, and Chelsea. What a eye-opening and educational experience that we've had today. One of the great things about this was it was a matter of perspective. It kind of opens up your perspective on how you were brought up, but also we're all different. We all come from a different place. History to me is always his story. So history for one person might be a different story perspective from another person, but we have to try to understand each other and listen. I want to thank you all, both of you here at the museum and those of you who have been participated online, for sharing this story and sharing in our perspectives. Well, as the Vice President of Development, it's my turn to pitch and pull out the tin cup. A lot of very exciting things are happening with the Dennis Farm right now. Those of you who are here in the space can see the pictures that we have of the plans for the Dennis Farmhouse Museum, and also we have photographs of the America 250 PA bell dedication ceremony. So there are QR codes that those of you who are here can use your telephones to directly connect with our website to make donations. Those of you who would like to make a donation to the Dennis Farm, if you go to the Dennis Farm website, www.thedennisfarm.org, you can make donations there, or and we take PayPal and all major credit cards. But I want to thank the Museum of the American Revolution. I want to thank you for again hosting us, and for the long term. It's not association. It's more like being family, and we truly appreciate it. And one of the things that we'd like to do is kind of make these simple presentations. But number one, to you, Zian, and number two, Adrian, for all that you do for us. Why don't you come stand next to Al? Let's get a picture.
Thank you so much. Goodness.
Oh, my.
Same family.
Lon, you want to get in this picture? And the invalid. The invalid. Want to mention, if all goes well and we raise the money, the museum will open in 2026, which is our nation's 250th anniversary, but it is also the 25th anniversary of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. So we really want to make it happen and invite you all up to the big celebration. Ta-da!
Thank you, everyone, and safe travels. Good night.
Oh, you have a close? Well, that's it.